This room is too quiet at night. The house is still. Margaret's asleep down the hall, and I'm sitting here, looking at a career in a box of files. Let me tell you something true. The Marcus Green case cost me my career, my reputation, everything I spent 40 years building. And if you handed me the file again, knowing what I know now, I'd lose it all over again for the same reason. Before that case, my life was the law. It was a calling. My father was a minister, my mother a teacher. Duty was the family business. I met Margaret in law school. We raised our kids here in Atlanta. James Jr. followed me into the prosecutor's office. Elizabeth works with victims' families. We were a family of purpose. My work, it was about giving voice to those who'd lost theirs, finding closure. I was elected district attorney 4 times. I believed in the system because I was the system. I was the man who stood between the chaos and the community. The weight of that responsibility, it was a weight I was honored to carry. Then came the night they found Sarah Jenkins, a bright college student working a late shift. It was a brutal crime. The city was screaming for an arrest. The pressure in my office, it was a physical thing. You could taste it. And then the detectives brought me Marcus Green. They had witness testimony. They had circumstantial evidence that looked like a mountain. They told me it was airtight, and I believed them. I looked at the photos of that young girl. I saw her family's shattered faces in my office, and I made Marcus Green the focus of all that rage, all that need for answers. The charge was murder. We would seek life. I remember the first time I saw him in court for arraignment. He was just a kid, really, 22, scared, trying to look tough. His court-appointed lawyer was overwhelmed, buried in cases. He uttered a plea of not guilty, but it sounded hollow in that room, with Sarah's family right there. I didn't see a person. I saw the defendant. I saw the embodiment of the evil I was sworn to fight. The case was a locomotive, and I was the engineer. All the signals were green. We were moving toward justice, or so I believed. The trial was set, and I prepared to do what I had done 100 times before. Prove to a jury that the man sitting at that table was guilty beyond any reasonable doubt. The trial was a pageant, a terrible, necessary pageant, and I was its director. The courtroom was packed every day. Sarah's family in the front row, leaning forward, hanging on every word. Marcus Green at the defense table, shrinking into his suit. His lawyer, he was doing his best, but he was outgunned. We had the resources. We had the momentum. I laid out the case for the jury. The witness who placed Marcus near the convenience store that night. The forensic testimony about fibers that could have matched. The timeline that suggested opportunity. I presented it all as a chain, each link strong, together unbreakable. I was convincing. I'd done this for decades. You learn how to talk to a jury. You look them in the eye. You make them see what you need them to see. I remember their faces, 12 citizens, trying so hard to be fair. The older woman in the second row, she'd glance at Sarah's mother, and her eyes would fill. The retired man, a former engineer, he'd nod when I explained the timeline. I was building a story for them, a simple, brutal story. And in that story, Marcus Green was the only character who fit. There was a moment, a piece of evidence the defense tried to introduce. A security camera timestamp from a bus depot a mile away. It was grainy, but it showed a figure that could have been Marcus, at a time that could have given him an alibi. His lawyer fought for it. I objected. I argued it was unreliable, speculative. The judge sustained my objection. I remember the look on Marcus's face. It wasn't anger. It was defeat. a quiet closing of a door. I told myself I was just following the rules, keeping the trial clean. I was the gatekeeper. That's what I believed. The closing arguments came. I stood before that jury with the photos of Sarah Jenkins on the easel. I talked about justice. I talked about closure. I told them the state had proven its case beyond a reasonable doubt. My voice didn't shake. I believed every word. The jury deliberated for 8 hours. I waited in my office. Margaret called. She asked how I was holding up. I said, "We'll have justice soon." When the bailiff came to say they had a verdict, the walk back to the courtroom was the longest of my life. The air was thick, silent. Everyone took their places. The judge asked the foreman for the verdict. Guilty. The word echoed. Sarah's family wept, held each other. I didn't look at them. My eyes went to Marcus. He didn't move. He just stared straight ahead, as if he'd been turned to stone. His lawyer put a hand on his shoulder. It was over. Then came the sentencing. I argued for life. I stood there and listed the reasons this man should never walk free. The judge agreed. When he pronounced the sentence, life without the possibility of parole, Marcus finally reacted. He looked at his mother in the gallery. She let out a sound I will hear until the day I die. A raw, animal grief. He mouthed, "I'm sorry," to her. Then the bailiffs were on him. They cuffed his hands behind his back. The chains jangled, a cold, metallic sound in that hushed room. They let him out the side door. He turned, just once, to look back into the courtroom. Not at me, not at the judge. He looked at the windows, at the slice of Atlanta sky you could see from the defendant's table. A last glimpse of the free world. Then he was gone. The door shut with a final, heavy thud. I packed my briefcase. I shook hands with the detectives. I hugged Sarah's parents. They thanked me. They called me their hero. I walked out of that courthouse into the afternoon sun, a free man. I had done my job. The system had worked. I was wrong. The steel door clanged shut, and the world shrank to a concrete box. That's what prison is, a shrinking. For Marcus Green, life became a series of numbers and commands. A cot, a tray, a yard measured in footsteps. You hear about the violence, and it's there, a constant hum in the air. But the real punishment is the sameness, the endless grinding sameness of a life you did not choose, for a crime you did not commit. He maintained his innocence. To the parole board, who told him admitting guilt was the first step to rehabilitation. To the other inmates who saw it as weakness or pride. To guards who just shrug, saying, "I didn't do this in a place built on the premise that you did." It's like shouting into a hurricane. The wind just takes your words and scatters them. But he kept shouting. He wrote letters to his lawyer, to Innocence Projects, to anyone who might listen. Most came back unopened or were never sent at all. On the outside, his mother aged. Her visits were a chronicle of grief, marked through plexiglass. She'd hold up photos of cousins getting married, nephews graduating, a life moving on without him. He watched her hair go gray, her hands begin to shake. Every "see you next month" was a prayer. And every time that door closed behind her, it took a piece of him. But the fight, it didn't stop. His original lawyer, he never gave up. He'd moved to a nonprofit, scraping for grants. He'd come visit, his suits getting a little more worn each year. "We're still looking," he'd say. "There's a new technology for that fiber evidence." It was a lifeline. thin as a thread. The breakthrough didn't come with a bang. It came in a footnote. A law student, reviewing old cases for a seminar, stumbled on the transcript. She was sharp. She saw the bus depot camera evidence I'd kept out. She saw the single eyewitness who'd later been diagnosed with a visual impairment. She saw a story that didn't add up. She took it to her professor. They made a call. It was 11 years in. A letter arrived from Marcus. It was from the Georgia Innocence Project. They believed him. They were taking his case. He told me later he read that letter 100 times. He slept with it under his thin mattress. For the first time in over a decade, the crushing weight of forever. It lifted just a fraction. He could breathe. Hope is a dangerous thing in prison. It makes the walls feel closer. But it's the only thing that keeps a man alive when the system has told him he is already dead. The day the judge vacated the conviction, I wasn't in that courtroom. I was watching the news in my study. They showed the feed from the courthouse steps. Marcus stood there with his lawyers, squinting in a sun he hadn't felt in nearly 18 years. He didn't look triumphant. He looked bewildered, hollowed out. The state's attorney made a brief statement about the interests of justice. No apology, just a procedural correction. A clerical error, finally fixed. I sat in my leather chair, Margaret's hand on my shoulder, and I felt a shame so deep it was a physical ache. That was the key moment. Not a victory. An admission of a catastrophic failure. And my signature was on the original indictment. Freedom Day for him was a Tuesday. They processed him out at dawn, gave him the clothes he came in with, which didn't fit, a bus ticket, $75 in gate money, the same as any parolee. No one guides you back. The world is all noise and speed and light. He told me later the first thing that overwhelmed him was the choice. In prison, you have none. That morning, standing at a bus stop, the simple question of, what do I do now, was paralyzing. He sat on a bench for 3 hours, just watching cars go by. Life after? There is no after. There's only a different kind of before. You try to rebuild on a foundation of ash. He missed the birth of nieces, the death of his father, the entire digital revolution. He'd never used a smartphone. The checkout line at a grocery store was a gauntlet of confusion. You can't recover the time. That's the brutal arithmetic. No settlement, no matter the size, buys back a single sunset he watched through barbed wire. The state of Georgia gave him a check, a sum of money that's supposed to quantify 18 stolen years. It's an insult. It pays for an apartment, maybe a car. It doesn't pay for the ghost that still sleeps on the floor because a bed feels too soft. It doesn't pay for the way you jump at slamming doors. His relationship with his mother. It was the one thing he clung to. She was his tether. But when he got out, the woman who visited him all those years was gone, worn down by the fight. They had to learn each other again, two survivors of the same shipwreck. As for me, I reached out. I didn't ask for forgiveness. I had no right to that. I just told him I was sorry, and that I would spend whatever time I had left trying to make the system I believed in so fiercely more just. He didn't have to accept that, but he did. We talk sometimes. It's the hardest, most necessary conversation of my life. The system has to change. I know that now. My son, the federal prosecutor, he and I debated at the dinner table. I tell him we got so focused on winning, on closure for the families in front of us, that we built a machine that could run over its own purpose. We must fund the conviction integrity units. We have to open the evidence doors wider. The Brady Rule is a piece of paper if there's no consequence for violating it. And we have to listen, really listen, because Marcus Green is not the only one. Right now, in cells across this country, there are men and women shouting into that same hurricane. Their voices are drowned out by our certainty. So here is my call to action from an old prosecutor who has sent men to death row. Listen to the ones who have been through the machine and emerged, broken but breathing, on the other side. Their moral authority is absolute. They are not activists from a textbook. They are living proof of the cost of getting it wrong. Support the organizations that give them a voice. Demand that your elected DAs prioritize justice over conviction rates. The next time you hear about a case being overturned, don't just think the system worked. Ask why it failed in the first place. The weight of that responsibility, it's on all of us now. Marcus paid my debt. The least I can do is speak his name and fight like hell so there are fewer names to add to that grim roll call. That's the only justice left for me to seek.